All right. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today. I'm Karthik Venkatasubramanian, and I'm the VP for Data Science and Analytics within Oracle's Construction and Engineering Business Unit. So we're going to be talking about something that's really exciting. We're talking about AI, machine learning, and how it's going to be applied on construction projects. I've got a panel of really, really smart people who've been doing this for some time, and we'll be hearing stories from them. We've got a truly global panel here. So I'm from Melbourne, Australia. We've got Ireland, we've got Madrid, we've got Hong Kong, and the event's being hosted in the UAE. So there you go. Hopefully a global perspective today. So let's start off with AI and machine learning, right? So it feels like a bit of a mouthful. It feels like it's a bit of a pie in the sky. So how do we talk about AI in a way that's real, which is what I think most of the people attending this session today care about? So can you talk to me about how you're using AI-based systems and tools in your organizations, in your projects, the here and now bit? So Simon, I'll start with you, and then Javier, and then Sankar, if you can give me your perspectives, that'll be great.
Okay, well, at the moment, we're using three variants of AI quite well. The first one is within the BIM 360 platform, the Insight program from Autodesk. We were part of the beta testers for that. And that works across our construction projects. It allows us to look at the risks, the issues that are raised on a project, and to ascertain the risk, the level of risk to the project from the activities on the project, whether they're quality or health and safety. We also have our own in-house developed AI for road maintenance, which is used in the Netherlands. And that's a visual machine learning tool that automatically detects damage to roads from video and from images. And we also work closely with a company called Firmus AI. We were working with them when they were developing their AI for finding issues within design. So we worked with developing the data model for them, and they're a startup based out of Israel and working in the States as well. And they've quite an interesting offering when it comes to using AI to find design issues to stop them moving all the way through into production and construction. That's what we're doing.
Right. Javier?
Okay. Excuse me. So besides some more typical examples of IA, like for example, using video or images for detecting PPIs or something like that, we are using them, or we have run a very interesting proof of concept of the use of machine learning for TBMs under operation. And I mean, the aim for that was to increase the productivity performance of the TBMs by reducing stopovers or reducing unexpected stopovers or engine failures and that type of thing. So we ran a proof of concept in one of our projects in Norway, in Follow Line project, where we were, I need to check that, analyzed almost 1 terabyte of information from more than 2,000 variables. And with that, that was on XWorks. So that was like a proving that this can really work. And what we do is for a certain period of time, we analyze the data and we program the model and we program all the algorithms. And then for the following period of data, we run that model to be able to detect if the model was able to predict the actual failure of the TBM or some kind of, not failure, but some kind of maintenance operations. We achieved quite a good success. So 5 out of the 6 events that were happening actually in the project were detected by algorithm. So we run like a very good concept that this is a technology that can be really useful, not only for the operation of an infrastructure during the lifetime, but also to be really used during the project performance or while the project is being built to optimize our production and to deliver a better product to our clients.
That's very interesting. I'll come back to you with some more questions on that, especially the 5 out of 6 and what actually happened. But Sankar?
Okay.
Right. So we are actually working on a few initiatives, AI. A couple of them are matured and some of them in development process. So first thing is on building energy itself. So typically you have AI software which just collect the data from IoT and then find a pattern and predict from there. But what we actually doing in our case, because we are from design aspects, so we actually design the actual chiller plants that's necessary for a big estate or etc. So bring in the design element and bring in the engineer's design knowledge and put that as part of this IoT data platform. And we have developed our own AI software called Neuron, which is being deployed in buildings to make it as a smart building from a design to operation and make sure that all the operations are correct to design. The second thing that we are actually developing, there are a couple of things. One is on facade inspection. So we are actually trying to use the traditional facade inspection, which people go on a gondola or a BMU outside a building. We are trying to use like drone-based imagery and then trying to do a taxonomy based on these data of different kind of buildings from whether it's Sydney, whether it's Singapore, whether it's Hong Kong, and we are doing like a massive labeling about these data so that we can use the image analytics to understand these kind of problems and issues with buildings. This is still under development. And the third thing that we are doing is mostly about, again, aerial and satellite imagery to understand about landslides, predict landslides in future. And you can use the same satellite imagery. What we have done in Shanghai basically is understanding the water flooding. We could use the open satellite imagery to predict these kind of things using AI model. But this is not purely about technology. We bring in the domain expertise of the design onto the software, and then we are trying to do a development model based on that.
Right. And Sankar, just to continue on that theme, right? Do you find that it's hard to sell the value of AI internally and to your customers? How do you tell them about AI? Is it a black box, or is that something that people just get?
AI has been overhyped, to be very honest, and possibly give that credit to the venture capitalists. They just, being the typical Wall Street investors, they just, quadruple the value. But in fact, it is always about the problem is we are not able to explain what is actually AI. And this is where we always, predict explainable artificial intelligence. It's very important. We cannot simply say that I load all this data back into a cloud platform, the cloud will do a magic. And most of the people are super smart. I don't think they will just accept AI. It may sound very cool, oh, I got an AI, but if you can't explain it, you will fail short. It's only opening the door. You cannot sustain with that. And this is where we show them like, okay, how many data we actually do the labeling part. For example, when I talk about Neuron, we are talking like million data plus. For facades, we have done about 60,000 images. So we can talk about the data. It is really the process that actually adds credibility to the AI, rather than just saying that I got an AI, which is basically, will do a magic and give an output for me. So I don't know how to explain my AI. That's a big failure already.
Yeah, and I agree with that, because that's something that I think a lot of people are struggling with. Simon, what's your perspective on this?
My perspective on it is that my job is to deploy technology to construction sites. Construction sites are very pragmatic. They are focus-driven individuals that have a job to do. And if you bring a new technology onto a project, if it works and it's easy for them to implement, it happens. If there is any difficulty in implementing technology, it doesn't happen, and you can forget it. With AI is very easy to implement, because when you bring it onto a project, it's doing all the work. It's presenting the information that this construction site needs without them having to do any work. When they create the data that's feeding into it, whether it's a model or an issue or a checklist or an observation, that information is then presented to the project in a format that they can consume. So if I take, for example, BIM 360 Insight, it presents the project with the information, with the issues that need the greatest attention, or with the subcontract that's potentially creating the greatest risk. And it puts the power in the project management hand to understand where they need to focus their information, where they need to focus their attention to best resolve that issue. So when we're bringing AI onto a project, most people, I say, it's like an app. It just gives you the information. It just does black magic in the background. For those that are interested in what's happening, we do go into a little bit more information about data modeling, about how it's doing it, why it's doing it, and how their actions can then influence how the AI is trained. So a lot of our people are training the AI just by interacting with it, even though they don't know what's happening. But the secret for adoption with AI is that it adds value to the project and there's no effort required for the project team, the delivery team, whether that's at design or it's at construction or operations, that the effort for them is retrieving the information and implementing their professional bias on the answers to train the model. We don't want them to understand the mechanics of it. They don't need to understand the mechanics of it. And it's just a tool in their toolbox.
Right, and that's no, it absolutely does, right? Because there is explaining it, but then there is also building trust in it, right? So if you're saying it's showing you something, the immediate question in my mind is, why should I believe you? Right. So we find that we explain to people like it's like weather predictions. You might not know how the predictions are made. It's still useful for you to be prepared. But there is an element of just explainability that helps build trust. Right. So Javier, your perspective.
Karthik, is it okay if I just supplement there? Apologies to interrupt. Because the construction industry is actually a very serious industry, because as an engineer, when they sign, they are liable they can go to jail when things go wrong. So they take their job very, very seriously because this actually impacts the life and death of people who are there. So that is also why some of the reasons for them to be more cautious. I won't say they are conservative. And they're also engineers because they really go for the proper structured process. Unlike a technology folk, which like a startup coming in like 6 months saying that I have an AI. So these are the things that an engineer sees this as like IT or technology folks are hardcore sales. And whereas the engineers are a bit more conservative, they undercommit, over-deliver. And that is where we need to build this trust. Simon said it exactly. The trust is actually very important. And so that is why undercommit and over-deliver is the way to be successful in construction industry.
No, that's really well said, Sankar. Javier, are you under-delivering, over-delivering? How are you placed with this?
I mean, I can't agree more with what they already said. I mean, first thing we do to build trust is to prove that the technology that we are deploying is meaningful for the guys on site. And to do that, we usually run with the first trials, first investment ourselves as part of our technology center, because that's our mission, to develop or to integrate the technology and to prove and to validate that this technology is actually meaning something for the company. It doesn't matter if it's IA or if it's machine learning or it could be any other technology. You need to build trust. You need to prove it. I mean, for us, at least, is the way it works. We prove that the technology is useful. We prove that it's robust. We prove that it's actually a benefit for the project and not a constraint or more work, additional work on top of their hands, but it's actually quite the contrary. It's something that is going to prevent or to relieve part of the job that they got to do and to make the life easier for them. And then one thing that we discovered is finally the construction team, many times, I mean, well, you can, of course, have some early adopters or some guys that are more curious, but they, on the other side, they mainly focus on the what, not on the how. I mean, if you tell them, okay, this can help you to save number of thousands of dollars or euros, because we are going to be able to reduce times that you are stopping the production. They really want that. I mean, if you are saying, okay, and we are using sensors and building out an algorithm and so on, they say, okay, fine, whatever. Reduce the euros and prove it, and then I implement it. And then for the next project, and how do you build trust? If you do good and you prove it's good, then these guys are moving from project to project. If you are doing good once, they will get back to you. So one way of building trust is proving reliability and then trusting on the people yourself.
Yeah, I think do one good and then the rest will take care of itself, right? Sometimes we are trying to answer that question. How do we get a foot in the door to do the first good so then the rest of the goods can start to happen, right?
Yeah.
And that's a really tricky question for us. And I'll get back to that question towards the end. But one thing that's quite topical is obviously COVID, the fact that we're all holed up and, the way we are at the moment. Has COVID impacted, Javier, maybe starting with you, has COVID impacted your projects and in what way? But I guess a secondary question to that is, in 3 years from now, when we have the next normal, new normal, call it whatever, right? Will you look back at this time and use the data from the COVID times for your machine learning? Or will you say, oh, that's an anomaly. This is not going to happen. I'm not going to use it because it skews my predictions and my data.
Well, obviously it has impacted our projects as any other business. It's true that, I mean, we are different parts of the world. So in every country, it has impacted more or less. I mean, in some construction works stop completely for some time, while in others, certain activities like construction were allowed. So even if you have to take more care in terms of social distancing in the project and try to ensure that the guys are separate and so on, but the project ran, maybe at a lower pace, but it ran. So going to the second part of the question, I would say that the period has not been so long and the impact has not been so strong in the site as to say that we need to get the data out as an anomaly. Maybe we need to take care a bit of that, but probably because we are focusing more in the construction part, it's not that different. Maybe if you look into the operation activities, I mean, O&M, maybe there where you need to operate for depending on your activity, if you are in essential service, probably it has no effect at all. If you have any other type of activity, maybe out of this sector, and you really want to use that data, maybe I would say, okay, maybe it's better not to use it because you actually had a complete lockdown for 3 months. So you basically have very bad data. But for the construction itself, I don't think we will need probably to look more into the detail, but I don't think we will be that bad as not to be able to make use of it.
Right. Thank you. Simon?
Yeah, I think Javier is right. Like for us, construction did slow down, but for pre-construction, it didn't slow down. All that happened was that the design world worked from home and went digital. I think as we look back over this time, the data, while it's anomalous, it will show the transfer of work from the office to the home space and how it hasn't impacted us overly. It will allow us to show the impact to logistics. It will allow us to show the impact on the way that we work. And I think the patterns that come from that will feed into a better way of working, because machine learning will learn from this. It will understand there's a better way of doing it. There's a more efficient way of doing it. And we will use this data as part of the data lake. While it's anomalous in the sense that it's not normal as we consider normal to be, it is the new normal. It is the way things are now. And the world has changed to be much more digitally accepting. We're more accepting of the fact that we can work as we are now digitally. Even this whole conference is virtual. And the numbers that come from this will back this up, that the new normal for us will be more digital, and that AI and machine learning will take this data, build it into the model, and we'll be able to reference then the gains that we get from it, like across everything, not just construction, but how we do construction, how we do logistics, how we do scheduling, how we do delivery, design, actual delivery of construction. And then the O&M, how that's going to, I think you're right, it's a whole life cycle issue. It's going to be anywhere that we can find a pattern, and where we've seen the impact of COVID on that pattern, AI and machine learning will learn from that and develop a new AI model, data model, that they will then use for their new thinking or their new process.
So let me pick you up on
I don't want to use words like linear regression and things like that.
No, well, we might need to towards the end, but let me pick you up on it, right? A lot of the discussion has been focused on the fag end once the asset is built, and talking about building management and energy, the design and build part. Where do you see the most impact of AI and machine learning? So there's stuff that you're doing right now, but where do you see that, look, if you did this next year, we see immense value based on where the technology is at, where the market demand's at? What are those things that you think will add the most value? Sankar, maybe I can start with you.
So the question is on design and build, but I would probably say this is like throughout the process. That's the biggest change that we are looking at. So I was talking to a client just a couple of weeks before from airport. She said like, oh, I'm just new in my job. I just realized that I didn't join an airport, but I joined a construction company, because the amount of infrastructure that happens in an airport is almost bigger than any other construction process happening here. So what she was asking actually is, we never operated like a construction company. We never bothered to collect data. We've been building runways, we've been building buildings, but it was like every time it's like silos. You just do it and you dump the data. So where we are trying to discuss it, like, okay, how do you do the common data environment? That is actually the fundamental talk that we have, all the way from design until it is operation handed over, so that you can have a virtual twin really on top of it. Because even with talking with BIM, and you're talking about 70 today, these are equivalent to a digital twin. If you did not do the right from the early years, it is possible for you to digital twin at a later stage in operation. Because after you do all the building and you're just going to add a sensor, that's probably not effective digital twin at all. And this is where the projects that we are doing it's all the way starting. In fact, Hong Kong has been out of COVID. I mean, relatively, we are actually been running already in a hyperspeed. Almost about $6 to $7 billion worth of contracts has been awarded in infrastructure in the last 3 to 4 months. And interestingly, the schedule has been cramped. It's not extended. It's not delayed. It's been cramped. What you probably would do is like you need to do faster than in 20% by 20% at least now, all these contracts. So we've been literally speeding up design, like what Simon pointed out, it's completely 100% virtual. We don't need to work, specifically on site, but equally the construction activities are happening with a lot more caution but all the construction activities are going in full speed. What I see is basically there's a transparency come out because of COVID. That's a positive outcome. Because until COVID, a lot of things were paper-based because you have a physical involvement. Now, because there's not going to be any paper-based, it's all virtual. So the data is coming in, which is fantastic for construction industry. Because once you start having data, bigger the amount, bigger the scandal sometimes, that goes without saying. So the data basically is actually bringing in a transparency with the clients, with the contractors, with all of them in the same. So the common data in two of the projects that I'm currently working, the client is in the same platform as the contractor and the consultants. And we're talking about multiples, a dozen of them. So everybody's working on the same document in parallel. Everybody's looking at the same BIM in parallel. So this is actually the so-called monthly progress meeting is almost irrelevant now because everybody knows what's happening on the fingertips.
Yeah, I would love to assume that everybody else is doing the same thing. That's quite far away, right? There's a bit of echo.
Is my connection getting a bit weary or something happening?
Not really sure, but Simon, can you tell us? Sorry, Simon, I was just saying that could you give me your perspective on what AI is going to be the most useful next year or in the next 6 months, right? Short-term focus.
Short-term focus, AI looks for patterns. As the construction industry is maturing digitally, as we're implementing more standardization, such as ISO 19650, BIM level 2, BIM level 3, as we're implementing more lean thinking, so we're looking at the industrialization of construction, we're bringing more patterns into the construction industry. And as Sankar says, this is about transparency. So the whole life cycle process, we're going to is becoming more transparent. And with AI, we're going to see much more owner involvement in the process. They're not going to be as hands-off because the whole thing here is about the operation and maintenance of a building. The construction industry builds something to be used, and the value is in using that thing. So as we become more transparent, AI is going to enable the construction process, and that goes from concept through design, through construction to operation maintenance, to become a much more transparent process. And it's a tool in our construction industry. So as construction professionals, it's another tool for us to ensure that we can achieve a better return for the clients, which ultimately is what we're here to do.
Perfect.
Karthik, Simon said it very well, but the AI is going to be successful only when you have structured data. So this is where the BIMs and the common data environment platforms are going to be the foundation blocks. Because if you don't have data, you can't build a model. So this is where all these data is going to enable this AI in future. If you don't get it right at the beginning, that's going to be difficult.
Right, and I just wanted to say that we need data, perhaps not necessarily structured data, because obviously there's a lot of unstructured data, especially text, images, voice, that are kind of getting into the field of AI and machine learning, right? And then I will ask you some questions around that, especially using NLP. Javier, your predictions for next 6 months, 9 months, 12 months?
Well, I wish I have many. I mean, I'm agree with my colleagues here. I mean, I think data is the relevant issue, but not only for the 6, 9, 12 months. I think data is needed for the future. I mean, data from 6 months is not so, I mean, it's relevant, of course, but it's not that big. I mean, we need data from many different projects, and we need at the same time something that is quite hard to tackle, and it's how to correlate data among the different projects, not only the data from one project, but across the project, especially unstructured data or data that is not maybe design data, but more in the construction base. Finally, if you go to an extreme, every construction project is a prototype itself. Since the location is different, the ground conditions are different, even the project teams working on it are different. So basically you have much data, or you may potentially have much data that you need to collect, and you need to somehow see how to make use of it in a benefit way, and try to structure it and aggregate it, considering all the different circumstances and all the different ways of having gathered that data. So that's something that we really need to focus on the next period. And I mean, I think, of course, I'm sure that thanks to COVID, all the AI related to imaging and video for health and safety issues will explode, and it will be much largely deployed into the projects, because probably now is a trendy thing, and it's something that is very easy to implement and it will stay. But we want to go beyond that. We want to go into more production aspects rather than only the health and safety aspects.
Thank you, Javier. So I've got 3 use cases that we hear from customers, and I will ask you to each of you and what you think is its usability and your comments around it. So imagine I have an AI prediction thing that can predict schedule delays, right? It can tell you you're going to be delayed by these many days, and this is the probability of the delay, and here are the activities in your schedule that might be delayed. How useful do you think something like that's going to be? So Simon, can I ask you to just comment on that, please?
For productivity and scheduling, I think it would be, AI will give you an interesting answer. I don't know if it's going to be much use in the short term, simply because we don't have industrial construction. The number of factors that are involved in schedule delays, even if you take out all the unknowns or the manageable ones, such as, delivery, logistics, design issues, changes, and you implement all things like weather, for example, and you try and bring weather in, your forecasting ability with that is limited to your weather, which is only 5 days. So the amount of impact it may have for scheduling would not be as powerful, say, as it would have for design issues, or it wouldn't be as good as it would be for, say, off-site fabrication. So a lot of those issues for design and scheduling can be managed out through different processes rather than AI. So while AI might be very good at looking back at previous projects and previous delays and things that happen and projecting them into future projects to give you better guidance on how to deliver a project in the future, the daily today for AI in scheduling may not be as, in the decision-making process, may not be as valid yet, because you have to have massive amounts of information on schedule delays to have the information to be able to make a very good decision, a good modeling decision-making process for that.
Right, so you're saying that you're not fully convinced that the models will be accurate enough to make a difference, because—
Well, for scheduling, only in the context of schedule delay. Okay, it will be able to say things like, oh, it's going to be windy in 4 days, therefore we'll have to stop our cranes, therefore we have an impact, therefore we'll move these activities either forwards or backwards to allow for the wind. Yes, it'll be able to do that. But if you're looking at an overall project, through things like lean, you could have much better control over your scheduling, because it's much more flexible in the short term, in a very near-term capacity, to react to what's going on at the moment. Like, unless we have IoT sensors in everything that we do and everything is plugged in, until that stage, the AI won't be able to react in a way that'll impact delivery at that time, at the moment.
Yeah, thank you. I'm also looking for questions, because we've got 10 more minutes, so please post your questions in the Q&A, and there is one question that I'll get to. But Sankar, before that, you spoke about structured data, and I said there's unstructured data, and we can use, natural language processing and all of those types of technologies. So what if I gave you a technology that will allow you to predict litigation risk, because people are talking about the crack in the concrete, the dangling wires, the overcrowded lift, or a potential health and safety issue? Would you find that valuable, and how do you think you're going to be using that?
Of course, this could be any technology will be always useful, and construction industry. So there's big buck in terms of litigation, right? But construction industry also is very close industry. Every time when we're trying to talk about technology, we also need to understand the culture of that industry and also the culture of the country. If you talk about litigation in America, yeah, brilliant, because they thrive on litigations. But if you talk about Asia, we thrive on relationships, right? Most of the businesses you don't see or you don't hear, most of the times it's all settled within the closed rooms. So that is a cultural stuff. It's not only about the technology. The technology has to fill in a cultural gap and a void in the industry itself. I'm not very sure that will be as helpful. That's my personal view, though.
Right. Thank you. And lastly, Javier, what about if I were to be able to predict design risks and issues within construction? Because we know that design risks cause a lot of rework and issues down the line, right? Is that something that you will find useful, and why?
Well, definitely. I mean, especially since large mega-scale projects are running usually design and construction in a fast-track mode where design and construction activities run almost in parallel. I think being able to anticipate that could really be meaningful. I think the potential will be especially in the interaction between the design office and the construction team, because even if we are supposed to everything work under a connected single model, you know that sometimes it's not really exactly like that. So I think everything that can improve or minimize a loss of information or rework on the design, on the construction due to design, or the contrary, that the construction wants to check the redesign things, can be helpful. But Sankar is in the design team and in design office, so probably he's got more experience in that aspect.
So I've got a whole bunch of questions. So I've got a whole bunch of questions from the audience that I want to kind of ask you guys. The first one's, what about bias in AI and in the data, right? Do you think, and Sankar, we can ask this question of you, do you think that that's going to be an issue, right, in the data that is using, because that's what is being then used for making predictions?
Definitely there is a bias you need to consider, but it also, my personal experiences when I work on like a building inspection, or for example, when I do a satellite image to understand a plastic pollution on a river or even a landslide, these are not subject to a human perception or human behavior in some sense. So an infrastructure AI is relatively doesn't have to do too much with the human bias, because when you're trying to do an AI for a human behavior, there's a lot of bias. But a mountain and a water, they behave literally the same way, and it just depends upon how much pollute we do, or how much impact that we create to these things. So we think that those are relatively less susceptible for bias. It's just that they are open for more data.
Right, Simon?
Yeah, I'd just like to point out bias can be a good thing. So when we're using AI in our projects with the BIM 360 Insight, the professional's bias comes through. So a professional engineer, project manager, can apply their professional bias to the data model, therefore improving the data. If we talk about a bias where you have, say, for example, a public entry of data where it's an uneducated bias or non-bias, then yes, it can mitigate can create some problems. But if it can also be a positive thing. So in the world of design, for example, where we're working with firms, we're taking the bias of errors found in design and reapplying it back so that they're removed. So that professional bias, once again, is playing a point in improving it.
Yeah, thank you. And Javier is going to answer. Javier, can you answer that? In addition to, are you using blockchain? Because that's the other question that's come up. Are people using blockchain, or is this another fancy word?
Okay, I will answer this thing, but first, I would just like to remark very quickly on what Simon said, because I think it's very important. I mean, we are talking a lot of data here, and we are maybe missing the people here. And I think that the professional experience of guys in our company and how they can make use of the data is even more important than the algorithm. And finally, the algorithm is going to give you some information, but it's like when you run a structural model. The machine will tell you some information, but you need to be able to have the professional to understand that meaning. And that's something that we don't need to forget. Going back to the blockchains, that was the question. I would say we have done some, in other part of the company, a proof of concept on the use of blockchains for health and safety issues. So to ensure all the traceability of the personal protection equipment being delivered to the guys on site and so on. So it's been a small model. We've been going more into the depth in other business, in the energy business, to ensure that the energy that we are producing is renewable and give some sort of labeling or certificate and proof of greener thing. But for the construction, we still need to develop a lot on it. I mean, we are far from that at the moment. It's something that we are working on, and probably it will have a good impact, but we are not yet.
Sankar, you were saying something about blockchain.
So on the blockchain, yes, Arup actually has done quite a couple of research reports on application of blockchains in construction industry, and it's available in public mode. But I personally was trying to work on a blockchain, for example, contracts, the bonds, the smart contracts. Every time you do a construction contract, you carry this piece of paper that goes for 10 years or even 15 years, because construction projects are very long. And then you search for this paper after 15 years, and you end up paying premium for this. So we were trying to see, could we get rid of this entire paper in the process? But this actually the challenge is not on the technology. Challenge is what is the return on investment for every player in that particular ecosystem. And this is where I'm still doing that research because it's not only within the construction industry, it's not only contractor and consultants, it's the banks, but especially also the government. They are not ready to uptake these kind of things, right? They still believe that paper. So it is very important that all these players come together. Then we see a potential there.
Yeah. So I'm conscious of time and we've got a few other questions, but I think one of the things that we should all address is there are a lot of skeptics in the room. And one of the questions we've got is, in one easy sentence, what will be the single biggest contributor of AI to the industry? So if each of you can answer that, and I'll follow up with one more question, that'll be great. So I'll start with Sankar, maybe you. So how do you say, what's the biggest contribution of AI to the industry?
I think it will be sustainability because I know it's one sentence. We are going to become from 8 billion to 11 billion population soon. Does it mean we need to construct more? AI can do more with less.
Okay, that's brilliant. Javier?
In just one sentence. Okay.
Only one.
Don't look to the fancy work, look to the potential of AI and the use of the data for your benefit.
All right, brilliant.
One sentence.
The only constant we have is change, and the only thing we can do is accept it.
All right. So that leads us beautifully to the last question. I'm on the fence. I'm not really sold with all the one-line brilliant sentences you're all telling me, right? I should be sold, and I am. But for anyone that's sitting on the fence and is a skeptic, what would you tell them, right? You've got literally 30 seconds to say, like, choose AI because of this. Let's start with you, Simon.
With anything, okay, if we can take the pain away from your life by using some form of technology or some form of process, will you accept it? Do you want to keep doing the thing that is painful for you, or do you want to make your life easier? And AI is one way that will make your life easier.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. Javier?
Okay, I would tell them to think one application, only one, where they want to make a benefit, a better improvement over a process, do something better that can impact their business. As long as they have data to do it, they will be able to make an improvement on that. And they can prove it. So just look for the proof of the concept, and then you will convince yourself.
Beautiful. Sankar?
Yeah, I would probably recommend them to spend more time on business impact. Don't start with technology. Always make sure that no matter how sophisticated AI, what is the bottom line in terms of dollar, or what is the bottom line for human life? Spend more time there. Don't get into the botheration of like what machine learning model I'm using, but really think about what it can really bring the impact to you. If the impact is not big enough, then you don't need to worry about AI.
Yeah, 100%. Has to add value.
Yeah.
And I think that's a beautiful close. We've got probably 30 seconds left. And I just want to quote what somebody said in the Q&A, that 91% of construction companies in India spend less than 5% of their annual turnover on technology. And we know there are stats everywhere like that. And perhaps that's because people don't talk value, right? People talk tech. We're busy with AI, and someone said regression, naive Bayes, and all the tech, and that doesn't really sell. People are building stuff on the ground, and they need to remove their pain, understand the change, and how it'll make life better for now and for the future, right? So on that really, really good note, thank you so much for spending the time with us. Everyone on the call, thank you so much. Hopefully this was useful. All of my lovely panelists, it was lovely talking to you guys. Thank you so much for this.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thank
Bye.
Cheers. Bye now.